What happens when you invest everything in your dream only to end up $80,000 in debt with no industry job to show for it? That's the reality I faced after getting my Bachelor's of Science in Game Design. Yes, I understand a BS in game design is ironic, but this isn't a story about giving up. It's about finding new ways to keep that passion alive. My game development journey started long before college. When I was 13 years old, for about over a decade now, I've explored multiple game engines such as RPG Maker 2000, 2003, XP, MV, you name it. From Game Maker 8.1 to Game Maker Studio, Game Maker Studio 2, and now it's Game Maker. Construct, Unity, UDK, which is Unreal Development Kit, Unreal, Unreal 4, Unreal 5, and finally Godot. This is a story of how I've managed to keep my dream alive. One game at a time, one jam at a time, really. Even when life took me in a direction that I hadn't planned, I kept making games. Each platform represents not just a different set of tools, but a different philosophy about what game development can and should be. Let's start at the beginning. My name is Josh, or as you know me, the average goop. And my journey started with RPG Maker XP when I was around 13 years old. Although I started making board games before then, my digital game dev journey really started there. While many teens were out, just playing video games, I was already trying to create them. I began by making custom logos, custom maps in RPG Maker, and I even tried modifying some scripts for other people's projects. Just really focusing on learning the fundamentals of game asset creation. And I even tried sprites here and there, but I wasn't too good at it. Eventually, I set out to create my first complete game, Fatal Destiny. What started as a small project blossomed into a 2.5-hour RPG with custom mapping, original characters, and a storyline that I'm kind of proud of today. It's a little silly. It shows my age. This game took me nearly 6 months to complete. I still have a copy, as you can see, and looking back at this footage reminds me of how exciting it was to create a complete world from scratch. Fatal Destiny became my proving ground in my early teens. I learned to work within constraints of the engine, time, to tell stories through game mechanics, and to finish what I started, skills that would prove invaluable throughout my game development journey. RPG Maker XP was also my introduction to programming concepts. Its Ruby-based RGSS, or Ruby Game Scripting System, I believe, let me peek under the hood and make small modifications. Each successful script edit felt like I was unlocking a new superpower, even if I was just scratching the surface of what coding could really do. I never really made it to creating complete scripts from scratch, but I enjoyed finding other people's code and making it do what I needed it to do, such as the action combat system and custom menus that I did for Fatal Destiny. However, RPG Maker XP had its limitations. It was designed specifically for JRPGs. Pushing beyond those boundaries felt like forcing a square peg into a round hole at times. I felt like I could only create RPGs, which makes sense, it's in the name. As my ambitions grew, especially as college approached, I needed to find something more flexible. After completing Fatal Destiny and continuing to explore game development in my mid-teens, I wanted to break out of the JRPG mold and try different genres. That is when I discovered Game Maker. Little did I know this game engine would carry me over for the next 10 years. I started using Game Maker in my teens before I even went to college. It represented a significant shift in my development approach, where RPG Maker locked me into a single genre and set of tools. Game Maker offered an open canvas for any 2D game I could imagine. One of my early Game Maker projects was a small reverse bullet hell style game called 2052 Space Journey. I have finally had the freedom to create something completely different from RPGs, combining custom pixel art with an arcade style gameplay. As I became more comfortable with the game engine, I started creating other games and just branching out into what I could do. I created Adventure Cube, a simple game that demonstrated how I was breaking away from the conventional concepts of RPGs However, it did kind of bring in some of those elements with equipment and just kind of the top-down view. Among some of those interesting prototypes, I was jumping from project to project while I found a game idea that stuck. Unfortunately, I never released anything lengthy during my exploration phase. I mainly focused on learning how to code at this point and really hone my 2D art skills and GUI creation. Interestingly, during college, we primarily used Unity and UDK, or Unreal Development Kit, for our coursework. I spent countless hours learning UDK, and I found my passion for level design through these courses. I even created a few projects in Perlenspiel, a minimalist game engine, as you can see. But throughout college, I kept coming back to GameMaker for my personal projects. There was something about its accessibility that made it perfect for quick experimentation. I used GameMaker for a few projects throughout college as well. One was for a made-up culture, and the other was a game pitch using only a few buttons as the constraint. And the teacher loved it. I aced the class, mostly because GameMaker made it look good. After graduating with my degree, but no industry job in sight, even after applying to every game company I could think of joining, like Blizzard and, Riot, those kinds of companies, GameMaker Studio became even more important to me. I dove into the game jam scene. The adrenaline of creating and completing a game in 48 or 72 hours became kind of addictive. Jetcake and Make It Stop came from these game jams. Quick, creative bursts that kept my skills sharp while I balanced my day job with my passion for game development. These projects forced me to really master GML, or GameMaker language. I went from simple drag and drop scripts to complex systems with state machines, barely even knew what those were at the time, and object inheritance. As basic as GameMaker can make it. The constraints of game jams taught me to scope properly and focus on core gameplay, skills that complemented my formal education, but were refined through practical application, since I couldn't get a job in the industry. After graduation, the harsh reality was settling in. The game industry jobs weren't materializing, student loan payments were mounting, and I had to take work outside the field just to stay afloat. I worked anything from landscaping gigs to electrician contracts, and even admin assistant jobs. GameMaker became my creative outlet, a way to keep my dream alive on evenings and weekends, as most game devs are familiar with. During this post-college period, I experimented with several other engines too. I tried Construct for its accessibility and ease of use, I returned to Unity for its versatility, and I even explored Unreal Engine 4. I was a little upset that everything I learned about UDK was completely gone, but I figured I'd at least give it a shot. And that was for its visual scripting and, of course, easy to use level design tools, my favorite thing. I dabbled in some 3D development, but quickly realized that as a solo developer with limited time, 2D was really where I knew I was going to complete projects. As I continued making games as a hobby, I started bumping against GameMaker's limitations. Complex projects would become unwieldy, and I found myself wanting more modern language features and better performance. Despite my deep familiarity with GameMaker, I knew it was time for something new. That's when I discovered Godot, an open source engine that promised professional grade tools without the intimidating learning curve or expensive licenses. I only started using Godot in 2024, a little bit less than a year ago. After a decade of working outside the industry while still making games as a hobby, I needed something that respected my limited free time while offering professional capabilities and, the promise of maybe getting into 3D games later on, maybe. My first impressions of Godot were through the Two Nerdy Nerds stream, actually, along with a few other people like Jotson and Jackie Codes. I enjoyed watching their projects come to life so quickly, and I was a little jealous. The only issue was I would need to learn a new coding language, but I can learn. That's what I'm good at. One of my first Godot projects was Archimist, a game about a pirate ship who fires alchemical concoctions at enemy ships as part of the pirate software jam. The node-based architecture initially seemed a little strange after years of GameMaker, but once I got in there, it clicked. I realized how elegantly it handled complex game structures, and I could focus on the fun parts of development rather than fighting with the engine and trying to make the systems do what I needed it to do. Around the same time I started with Godot, I also began learning digital art with a tablet. After trying 3D development in college and finding it was too complex for solo development, I decided to focus exclusively on 2D game development while I built these new skills. After years of using pre-made assets or simple programmer art, creating my own visuals felt like reclaiming another piece of the development process. My ambition probably got the better of me with Rise of the Intern, a project that grew far beyond its initial scope. Ironically, much like my career aspirations, it turned out to be more complex than I anticipated. But Godot's organization tools have helped me keep it manageable, even if progress was slower than I'd like balancing it with my day job. However, I decided this game wasn't something I wanted to work on long term, and I found myself taking on more than I could build at the time. Now, Backhand Bandit came next, where I pushed myself to explore more of Godot's capabilities and worked on a team for a game jam with the two nerdy nerds. As a matter of fact, we won. We got first place. The signal system made it easy to decouple game systems, something that had always been a challenge in Game Maker, so I could feel the progress. And I got so much practice with the UI tools in Godot for this project, which I find to be my favorite part of the engine right now, and I loved it. As a freelance web designer, the tools felt right at home to me. Now, I'm working on something deliberately smaller. An idle clicker game inspired by Cookie Clicker and one of my old clicker games, Double Chocolate Chip Muffin Clicker. I know it's a mouthful. After years of game development as a hobby, I've learned the importance of completing projects and the joy of actually shipping something. Sometimes the best way forward is to take a step back in scope, but ensure that you cross the finish line. Looking back on my journey from a 13-year-old working in RPG Maker XP to my current projects in Godot, I see that each platform matched a different chapter in my life. Fatal Destiny and RPG Maker accompanied my early teens and initial love for game creation. Game Maker bridged my pre-college experimentation and post-graduation reality. Meanwhile, my college years immersed me in professional tools like UDK, Unity, Blender, and other project management tools before ultimately I found Godot. I won't sugarcoat it. Graduating with $80K in debt from a game design degree without landing an industry job was devastating. For years, I questioned whether I should have pursued this passion at all. But through these tools and the communities around them, I found a way to keep creating that fits within the reality of my life. Each engine taught me something beyond just technical skills. RPG Maker taught me to finish what I start. Game Maker and Game Jams taught me to work efficiently within constraints. College exposed me to 3D development in UDK and Unity, showing me both what's possible and what requires a team rather than a solo developer. Now, don't get me wrong, you can still make a solo 3D project, it just wasn't really for me. And now Godot is teaching me that it's never too late to learn new skills. These days, I'm focusing on smaller, completable projects like my idle clicker game, and maybe even some game jams. I've learned that the joy comes from creating and sharing, not really from the tool that you use or whether it's your day job. Sometimes, the most sustainable approach to a passion is accepting it as a beloved hobby rather than forcing it to be your career. That's why I'm returning to weekly game development streams. I miss the community, the accountability, and the shared excitement of creating something new. Even if it's only for a few hours a week, it keeps that creative spark alive while connecting me to others on similar, maybe even the same journey. If you're just starting your game development journey, or if you're like me, balancing it with a career path, remember that there's no wrong way to be a game designer. The perfect engine is the one that helps you finish your game, and the perfect approach is the one that you can sustain through life's challenges. In the comments, I'd love to hear about your own journey. Are you creating games professionally, as a hobby, somewhere in between, kind of like me? What challenges have you faced? And really, what keeps you going? If you enjoyed this video, please consider joining me for my weekly game development streams on twitch.tv/theaveragegoob. We can work on projects together, share tips, keep each other motivated, because that's really what I need right now too. And sometimes the most important thing is just showing up and putting in the time, even when life gets complicated. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.